The time is November 1988, and in this modern take on Charles Dickens' classic A Christmas Carol, Frank Cross, played by Bill Murray, is a wildly successful television executive whose cold ambition and selfish nature has driven away the love of his life, Claire, played by Karen Allen. But after firing a staff member on Christmas Eve, Frank is visited by a series of three ghosts who give him a chance to reevaluate his actions and right the wrongs of his past. This week on Back to the Balcony, we cover 1988's Christmas comedy, Scrooged.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
All right, so this one, just like probably so many others, is in their holiday rewatch cycle. And this is probably next to another one we're going to discuss on the show, is in my top five when it comes to holiday rewatches. And I think this one became almost a classic when it comes to just holiday cycle rewatches. You have Bill Murray, you have this Christmas Carol motif that is unique at the time that when it came out, it gives a unique spin. And that's what the reaction was for me. And that was kind of my initial attraction to this movie is you have such a great cast. You have a unique spin on A Christmas Carol that makes it contemporary and makes it almost more of a comedy and not so serious. And this is what makes this one more of the unique Christmas movies at the time that came out. And even to today, the rewatches, again, I've seen this movie 1,000 times. So this wasn't really a shocker and I didn't really gain anything new, but it is still something fun to put on and watch and enjoyable.
Okay, so I think that we will have a little bit of a discourse on this one because, yes, I do watch this movie every year, but I think it's just because out of habit. It's not my favorite, and I have to tell you why. There's a huge differentiator between what the film is and what Bill Murray is doing. If there was ever a Bill Murray movie, it's this, because he could not even really be in a Scrooge movie in this performance. He could just be doing whatever in whatever film, whatever story this is. What he is doing is completely off the page. And when you read about the production of it, all the stuff that was going on, him and Richard Donner, who I'm a huge fan of, did not see eye to eye. And essentially, they were doing two different productions. And you can feel it. There is the Christmas Carol motif of this movie that flows through all those plot points, A, B, and C. It's the exact structure. And then you've got whatever Bill Murray's doing for this. It's a very chaotic movie when you've got that one performance that doesn't really blend with what the rest of the movie is doing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it is a lot of chaos and it doesn't feel complete when I watch this movie. But I'm a Bill Murray fan, so of course I'm going to laugh at what he does. I laugh at everything Bill Murray does. But I think one of the things that really hurts this movie for me is how good Richard Donner directs it. How good the camera work is, how good the art direction is, the score. It almost feels like it could be like a proto Tim Burton kind of thing, right? It's got a lot of that auteurish quality to it, which is why I'm a huge fan of Richard Donner. Like I said, he's a journeyman. He can do any genre of film, horror, comedy, action, and this kind of blends all of it into it. So at the end of the day, yes, do I watch this every year? 100%. But is it in my top 5 favorite holiday films? Absolutely not.
It's funny because you hit something I had notated for later in the show, and you hit it perfectly. This is almost watching two movies in one. This is a Bill Murray character stand-up almost doing his own show. Then you have the Christmas Carol. So you watch this because you like Bill Murray. If you're not a fan of Bill Murray, you're probably going to steer away from this movie on likability. But this is where we have two separate movies, especially when it comes to Murray's portrayal. It is obvious that he is not meant for the rom-coms, the sweetness factor, but he is a completely brilliant asshole in
Mhm.
this movie. And this is where it really does attract us to this character is he goes all in on the Frank Cross Scrooge character, and we're buying into that. But the minute we have him get into a romantic situation or reflection, that's where it does fall apart, where you're just watching because it is Bill Murray. When we have him kind of go into the past and the romantic, where he has this goofy grin, and that's how he kind of projects his emotion or his fun factors is just completely awful, cringy grin. That's where it really does feel off. And I think with Donner, that's where he had trouble controlling Bill Murray because there is no real connection on the human element. And that's where it just kind of goes disconnect from the tone, the darker tone of the movie. And it just doesn't feel right. But at the end of the day, when you take two things that you really like between the Christmas Carol movie, the Three Ghosts, the Lessons Learned, and Bill Murray, put those together, you have something that's going to really appeal to everybody. So I get exactly what you're going after on that. So because it is, as a movie, it is underneath really messy. And we'll get into it. But I think with the darker tone, I have some complaints about that. But holistically, I think it's a well done, executable message of a Christmas movie to make you really feel good by the time the credits rolled.
But it's also daring to be a little bit more challenging with its humor and its darkness. Like it's really a perfect film for the era that it came out in. Definitely going after like the yuppie culture, the excess of the 80s, the it's so funny because I just talked about it on another podcast today, the American success syndrome. That's essentially what Bill Murray's character is going through. One of the things though I can say about this movie is that I think what hurts it is that he doesn't have enough comedians to play off of. If you think about the chemistry in Ghostbusters, he's got Harold Ramis, he's got Dan Aykroyd, he's got Rick Moranis to work around. And then even in Groundhog Day, which is like a rom-com to me, it works because Harold Ramis knew how to kind of, rein him in. And even though there was conflict on that set too, I mean, pretty much there's always some kind of conflict in a Bill Murray film with a director. He understood the assignment. This one, I feel like it's him looking at the script and saying, no, I don't like that. I'm doing this. And Donner essentially saying, okay, I'm going to make a movie around you then. And that's how it feels. But with this movie, the thing that I really noticed this watch is all my favorite moments in this movie are all the moments with the side characters, with the bit parts, with the little cameos per se. For example, my favorite line in the movie is Brian Doyle Murray's role when he has a flashback with Brian Doyle Murray's dad. It's like, my back hurts, my legs hurts, I'm only 4. Like the quotable lines in the movie for me, I didn't realize are all from secondary characters. Carol Kane as the ghost of Christmas Present. I'm going to call him Buster Poindexter, but David Johansen is the cab driver. There's a ghost of Christmas Past. These are great, colorful characters that I think are actually more memorable and important to the film than whatever Bill Murray is doing. But you get the best of both worlds, because you do get the Bill Murray show if you like it, but the character performances of the side characters, I think, is what makes the film even more memorable and quotable.
100%, because between Johansson and Kane, this is where it really does have that animated feel. And this is what I appreciated about these two characters on the design of them is it really goes from kind of a curiosity of not quite danger, but somewhere in between. And then you get the soft-hearted humor from them. You get the goofiness from them to say, okay. That's a tricky thing to do with this dark tone. You have the dark tone of the movie, especially with the intimate shots going into this to show kind of the intimacy of going into the past. It's between comedy, the performances, and just the overall dialogue. That's a tough balance for any director to accomplish. And I think the only miss, if I were to critique it, is they needed more lines, except for just one sentences here, one sentence there, to really kind of shine to support Murray. And that's where we really get the Bill Murray show, is he dominates. And again, rightfully so, in a Charles Dickens adaptation. But the ghosts do play an important part, especially with performances this engaging, because we really, by the time we get to the end of the each sections of the Ghost. We really want more of the supporting characters, and we've talked about this before. And I think to an extent, it's a little bit wasted. But the time given, we appreciate it, and it's memorable. I can go back even after my second viewing of this movie and think to each detail of the two Ghosts of Christmas Past and Present, and look at those scenes from shot to shot because they're that memorable.
The people in the real world as well. Bobcat Goldthwait and Alfre Woodard, Robert Mitchum showing up, and one of my all-time favorites, John Glover, showing up as like the director that's kind of taking his space. There's a lot of great performances of the real people in there as well. And I think that really does speak to like the Richard Donner isms of this movie, where he can bring in a lot of colorful characters and side characters to make the movie feel more human and not just the Bill Murray show. But it also does something really fun with having that movie within a movie kind of thing, right? They're doing that live version of the Christmas Carol, which is a lot of fun. And there we get to see John Houseman and Robert Goulet and Buddy Hackett. And I think it only makes sense now if you were raised in the 80s, Mary Lou Retton is Tiny Tim, right? It's really of its time, but it still cracks me up because, hey, I used to watch the Mary Lou Retton aerobic show on Saturday mornings after the cartoons. So for someone like me in their 40s, it works out great. It's a great callback to I don't know, simpler time. I think when we talk about the era this thing comes out too, like this is a year after Wall Street. We already talked about shows like Bad Influence, where we do have that yuppie culture going on. I just watched Fisher King last night randomly, and that was another film too that kind of takes place in this New York success syndrome era. And it plays differently to different audiences now, because when I watch this with, my partner who's a little bit younger or my kids, it's hard to relate to this era and these characters that are trying to like, hey, I'm working 80 hours a week at the TV station because I'm young and I'm successful and I'm a producer and I'm a fighter. No one really thinks that way anymore, right? The work-life balance of the last 10 years really changes how audiences view films like this, and the success and career being like the mainstays and the main goals of characters back in the 80s and 90s. It's why I don't think I hear kids or younger generations talk about this movie as much, because there's nothing really to relate to. This is an older person's Christmas film because it really plays on tropes that we knew about in that decade. So that is really funny to me when I think about when I put this into my Christmas viewing schedule and how poorly it plays with everyone else but me and my mom, because we grew up with it. Like, we were together watching this movie as a kid, and then everyone younger than me just doesn't get it. They want to watch Elf. They want to watch the Santa Claus, right? It's a product of its time, but I feel that it's got enough quirk and enough visual flair, like I said, the Tim Burton stuff, that if it just got a little bit more push to this younger generation, it might resonate better now than it has over like the last 15 years.
Can you imagine if an adaptation came out today? The relatability piece of it is so much harder when it comes to the
Yeah.
Dickens message. So, because even here we do have themes of workaholics, money, greed, and how we came about this money and greed. So, in today's society, this would be a challenge to really tap into a relatability factor, because this is going to be the closest we get to a contemporary Uh, Christmas Carol, because there is nothing that can touch the hardship. There is nothing that can really touch the greed when it comes to relatability of past. So this one, I think, is the last great rendition that we're going to get from A Christmas Carol without getting the same old recycled stuff of the original material. So, which there's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, I think this one was a bold move, and I think they did it right the best they could, because I will speak to this one night and day on the challenges that Donner had to bring all these different tones, comedy, genres together. My nitpick is I really wanted to see more of the actual show. I wanted to see more of the musical, the dancing, and I feel like and we get to that, and it is heartwarming and it's motivational. It's like watching Daddy's Home 2 on the finale. You do have that heartfelt message. And I think if we would have added a little bit more Christmas music to it and that feeling, that would have lightened it up for Murray to really kind of just shine and give kind of a supplement to his performance and ease him off of that forceful, I have to show emotion piece of it. So there are elements in this movie that really could have gone a little bit further. But given, I will speak this night and day again, that Donner's direction on this did the best he could with so many things to juggle.
Yeah, and it's a mixed bag. And it's interesting when I went back and looked at the writers. So, one of the main writers was Michael O'Donoghue, who was the original head writer for Saturday Night Live. We both enjoyed the Saturday Night movie about the first episode of Saturday Night Live that just came out in theaters. And his character, Michael O'Donoghue, is actually a big part of that film. And I think that really kind of spoke a lot to how this movie does feel chaotic, because it does feel like it is like a live sketch comedy put in a feature length film. The scenes are like rapid fire, they flow right together. It very feels much like a guy who wrote a script that's not used to writing a long narrative, 130-page screenplay, right? It does feel like that bulletin board with all of the different segments just note carded onto it. That's how it feels. And when I looked at the writer, I'm like, that makes so much sense. The chaos of this movie matches the chaos of a sketch comedy show. And Bill Murray is essentially playing the sketch comedy host of this movie. I like the fact that you said that you wish you saw more musical, and so do I. I almost feel like the musical should have been playing throughout the whole movie. And as we're going from scene to scene, we'd be seeing it like on TVs in the background or cutting back and forth to what was going on while John Glover was directing it. So we didn't miss out on all of those fun, opportunistic musical moments that we've gotten from that show that they really concise down towards the end. I like that a lot. The sentimentality of this movie, too, I really like, because if there's one thing about a Scrooge story, the most emotional moments are the moments of when he sees his past and when he sees his present, and then like the ominous horror of seeing his future. And Murray does pull out a lot of great emotional moments in the film that I feel are outweighed by all the boisterous performance that he has for the rest of it. For example, the waterworks segment where he goes back and he sees his childhood. And he does have that raw emotional moment where he's got genuine tears and sadness. We always forget how actual good of an actor he is. And he shows it. He shows his range in this movie. But like you said, it's so chaotic and here and there that I think those moments get overlooked. And I can only imagine having to edit this movie. Everything you have to go through and see all these different characters and all these different emotions that he's throwing at you, as well as like the boisterous improvisational moments. I'm amazed they were able to actually staple something together at the end of the day. And you're the guy that likes to speak about editing, so editing of this movie is a challenge for me. What about you?
It is a challenge. This whole movie's about challenges, and to an extent, I'm going to pull a you. It's an appreciation
Mhm.
almost because, again, you nailed it. Is it does feel like an SNL sketch because you can almost feel each scene going to the next room, going to the next setup, going to the next comedy bit. Because again, we get that style of what I spoke to earlier, the intimacy of the shot. It's really squared by 4:3. It almost feels
Right.
like 100% of the time. So I think this editing is to an extent a challenge to get the emotional feel to for it not to be overly chaotic than what we got, but the transitions go really quick. The transitions from the character exits, especially from the ghost, that goes really quick. So there's no time to really take it in. And I think when it comes to the editing, it is a little bit chaotic, but it's challenging. But I think given and keeping to the pace of it, I think they do a fantastic job. Because I think when it comes to transitioning from real life to the ghost, that is going to be a little bit challenging on how do we transact? How do we transition these ghosts between the two without using special effects, or let's just throw in like a fog machine. So they really do kind of just use the characters to kind of go in and out of these edits, in and out of these transitions, and without using a lot of these just cheap, let's just throw in those special effects. They use humans and they use a lot of it and a lot of the characters to really transition. That is skilled editing when it comes to a chaotic movie like that. So there is a level of respect I have for it. Does it 100% work all the time? No, but does it work with the pacing and the tone of the movie? It does.
Murray was famously quoted that a lot of the movie that he actually liked that was shot ended up on the cutting room floor. Like apparently there was a lot more performance from him, there was a lot more improvisation, and he said it feels choppy because a lot of the stuff that he did that he really liked didn't end up in the movie. And I think that's why we feel that way is that there are moments where it feels like there should be more of what he's doing, but then it stops and does like a cutaway or just switches to another scene, and so therefore it does feel sloppy. He said there was a lot more character interaction in the scene where he's with Anne Ramsey and Michael J. Pollard, the homeless folks. That feels like a missed opportunity because there's a lot of great funny moments in there, but it's super short. And then it leads us to a moment where there's some emotion and sadness, but it doesn't feel earned because we don't spend a lot of time with them. And I guess in the original cut, there was a lot more time with them. And that's one of the things that he hated seeing gone. So I get it. I get why the movie does feel that way. Because even though it is so chaotic, it is long in the tooth. It does kind of run longer than I think it should. Like I feel especially the Ghost of Christmas Future segments kind of outweigh their welcome. And that is one of the issues to me is like it does suffer from third act slogginess, and the finale does feel a little let's hurry up and close the show because I feel like they didn't have a lot of places to go, and that's probably in the editing where they like, okay, we have all this great content, we've all this great stuff, but we got to end this movie somewhere. And they really just kind of wrap it up with a song. And I don't know, like I said, it doesn't really feel earned, but as a Murray fan, it doesn't really bother me too much, but it's definitely noticeable.
And when it comes to the editing, especially when we get to our homeless shelter, to me, I don't think that is per se the editing, because when we're taking chunks of movies
Right.
out, this is Donner saying, this is going to hurt the pacing or this isn't necessary. Let's do this scene because this is going to give the emotional reaction. You do feel that there is something missing. With that one scene that we're talking about, having that emotional reaction, there is something missing there. And I think that could have really taken this to not feel as chaotic, of slowing it down when we get to that emotional reaction. Do we get an emotional reaction at the end? Yeah, but it's artificial because it's a song, it's Christmas. We're going to have that. But this movie could have gone to a much more deeper level. But I think Murray's character would have pulled that back a little bit, because I don't know if he would have been able to transition that emotional element to a deeper level. And that would be my only skepticism of where that scene was going to go. There has to be a reason Donner would have taken this out. And if I were to predict, I would say it just doesn't work.
I agree. Now let's go back to I think the feel of the movie. I said it felt like a Tim Burton movie in a sense, and I think one of the main reasons why it does is because it has a Danny Elfman score on top of it. So not only does it have very Burton-esque production design, when you have that Danny Elfman score, which is a great score, I think it's a very underappreciated Danny Elfman score, and I think one of the reasons why is it was unavailable for decades. Like it didn't come have like a physical release until the mid 2000s. It is very recognizable and it works with the movie, but I think that's one of the reasons why I like Richard Donner as a director is because if you did not know it was a Richard Donner film, it's not a big deal because he didn't really have a signature style. He was a journeyman. He would just direct a movie and it was good. He knew what he was doing, but he didn't have like an artistic flair the way Tim Burton would. And I miss directors like that. I miss directors that could just direct anything and just have it be a good movie and not have to have like their own personal style stamp on it. But I think that it does get confused sometimes for like a Tim Burton movie because of that Danny Elfman score. So that being so close to Beetlejuice and then being like the same year as Batman, a year removed from Batman Returns and Nightmare Before Christmas, I feel like it is a spiritual cousin to these Tim Burton movies, especially the holiday based ones, but not necessarily being one. Yeah. At the end of the day, I think my closing argument on Scrooge is that it is not by any means my favorite holiday film, but it is in the rotation because it feels like it just belongs there. But it's not the first thing I grab. It has a lot more nostalgia than it does personal taste and personal appreciation.
I would agree. And given the darker tone, I think that's the biggest uniqueness of watching a dark Christmas movie without going full
Right.
horror. And the fact that we have the Ghost of Christmas past and present, they look like Tim Burton Batman
They do.
villains. So there's a lot of elements here to really make it unique. It's the darkest Christmas movie in my rotation, and I think it is nostalgic, and I think it is has that rewatchability that you can kind of nick apart and just when it comes on, just watch it because you do have, like I said in the beginning, two separate movies and two separate things that will really attract you to this movie is the fact you have the adaptation, you have Bill Murray, and you have the comedy. And people will appreciate the balance between all of them, even though it's not 100% well executed. It's not a great movie. It's a good movie, in my opinion, because of all the challenges this movie does present. And to really give you that holiday feel that it is a Christmas movie being so dark.
Our critics had very different opinions on this movie, so let's go ahead and run it off. This was Gene's movie to bring to the show.
This is a most inventive and very funny film, I'd say about half the time, when it's setting up the introduction to the Bill Murray character. Then with the ghost, it starts to wander into areas of weak imitation of the Ghostbusters, and yet Bill Murray is absolutely hilarious throughout. It's a close call, but I'm giving this movie thumbs up for its big laughs early on and a sweet relationship between Bill Murray and Karen Allen toward the end of the picture.
Okay, so how about this? I don't think it's as close to Ghostbusters as it is to Beetlejuice, and he's notorious for hating Beetlejuice. It plays very similar to Beetlejuice. It's almost in the exact same wheelhouse. In my opinion, it's Beetlejuice during Christmas time. So I find it funny that he, once again, throws the Ghostbusters reference out there, but he's so favorable of it when the closest thing that I can think of was just a year prior being Beetlejuice. And the same year, Little Monsters. It's just funny to me.
So I didn't get the Ghostbusters vibe from it. I mean, given it's Bill Murray, that's the only thing I can take from it is you have his quick wit about him with this character. I mean, it could be the cinematography. I know Michael Chapman did Ghostbusters too. It could be a little subtle underlying feel of Ghostbusters too, because that was a little bit darker in my opinion. But this one is, you're right, more of the Tim Burton feel than anything Ghostbusters. The fact they have Bill Murray and three ghosts in it, that's probably what he's getting from. But in no way is he accurate in this one. But again, I do appreciate that he's praising this movie.
I do like the fact that he did give a shout out to Karen Allen because I think Karen Allen was definitely an underutilized actress during the 80s. You know, she peaked really big with Starman and with Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then we didn't see a whole lot of her afterwards. So the fact that she is like, you could say the leading lady in this, even though her segment's really just confined to Act 2. It is nice to see her because she's a very natural person. They didn't put like a glamorous starlet in this role. They made her feel really authentic. I appreciated that. And it also makes Bill Murray's character work better because it does show that progression from, hey, this was actually like a good guy who was in love with a down-to-earth girl, and success and that need for success and the ego is what ruined it. And now it's everything superficial. So it tells the story really well. But I'm glad that he did call it out because if there's one thing that I think Gene is notorious for is not giving enough recognition to people that help drive the movie performance-wise. He usually sticks to the stars, to the main people, and then completely leaves out some of the people that really actually drive the movie with the performance, which are usually bit parts.
It's kind of hard to ignore Karen Allen because she is an absolute sweetheart in this movie, even to the point where she outshines Bill Murray to when we get to the argument at the homeless shelter. I wanted to tell her to run because you can do way better. She is completely likable and to an extent overly likable because you almost want to root for her instead of the main character. So that is the only kind of contradiction that I can say about it, but she does a fantastic job on keeping it real. Between the chemistry of Bill Murray and her, I think she outperforms because she really understands this character because you can tell this is who she is because it comes across so natural.
Agreed.
I didn't like it at all, and I'll tell you why. I felt that I was picking up throughout the movie more of an aura of anger and hostility than I was one of comedy. For example, at the end when Bill Murray gives his long speech about brotherhood and loving each other and the Christmas spirit and the whole cast is behind him, that seemed almost like a frenzied harangue. It seemed like he was protesting too much, that he was pushing it. It didn't have any gentleness or any real warmth in it. It seemed like a guy having a nervous breakdown instead of having a Christmas message for us. And throughout the movie, I felt an undercurrent of a lot of anger and high tension throughout this film, rather than the humor you'd be looking for.
I agree with him 100%. That's like we said, if you're signing up for the Bill Murray show, you're going to get the Bill Murray show. And if that's not what you're looking for, if you're looking for a holiday treat, which feels like Roger is, it's not there. But something tells me that he had a little inside information into what the production was like, because he goes into it in his next segment. I feel like he knew what was going on behind the scenes, and he used that knowledge into his analysis of the movie and the analysis of the performance, especially in his next segment. But we talked about this already, the chaos of it, the Bill Murray performance, and he's right. His monologue at the end is not heartfelt. It is almost like, I'm going to say, a sermon of a roadside prophet, right? It's kind of out there and it's boisterous and it's very performative. For those that like Bill Murray, it works just fine, but I get what he's saying, where it doesn't match the dialogue. It doesn't match the message that the movie is trying to convey. And so if that's what you're looking for in your Christmas film, you will be disappointed, because that's not what this is.
He's 100% right, because when we get to that speech, it's almost like giving a thank you for a horrible Christmas present. It's that awkward, forced dialogue that just almost cringes. And even as a kid watching that scene, even though, again, it's cheesy, it's Christmas, and the climax does what it needs to do, but that stands out as something even more cringy. Is it is so forced, and then we have the supporting cast that just kind of go with it. And he said it perfectly, it is a nervous breakdown, but nobody cares. Everybody is just accepting this forced emotional dialogue. They're at home watching TV when the executives should be horrified that they just ruined this multi-million-dollar production, and this 2-minute piece of dialogue just makes it okay. And he doesn't even deliver it that well. But you know what? It's Christmas. So
It's Christmas.
It feels good.
Like I said, I think that Roger read that article. I think he had some inside information, because when I watch the film, I don't get any inkling that Murray had a bad time. I just feel like Murray was taking over like he often does. The character is not a joyful character at all. So it seems like a little out of pocket to say that he doesn't feel any joy in the performance. That feels like something that's a little bit forced into the conversation. And that's why I think he knew that the problems of the production between Richard Donner and Bill Murray were there, because that's what he's using as his focal point, is the fact that he's actually making his biggest arguments about the lack of joy, and that it seems like Bill Murray's not having a good time making this movie. I don't think that anyone just watching this movie would feel that, because that's what the character is. The character doesn't like being in this position. The character doesn't like being subjected to these ghosts. It doesn't make sense that he's using that. It's not a joyful character. So why are we even mentioning that part of this discussion?
If this is his main argument, this is where he's really going to show his flaws, because you're 100% right. 90 to 95% of a Christmas Carol isn't supposed to be joyous in this adaptation. It is supposed to be a selfish man that creates pain to others, who goes back to see his inner pain from his childhood, the pain he's caused the people that he once loved in his present. So this isn't joyous. The last 10%, the last 5% of this movie is supposed to give you that Christmas feeling. It's supposed to give you that joyous feeling. And again, we've talked about it, that has issues. But this is where, like I said earlier, Bill Murray is at his best when he plays the asshole, and I think he does that well. What he doesn't do well is when he transitions and tries to give the emotional element, and that's where I don't think he's having a horrible time. I think he's having a troubled time getting into that new persona, that new character, especially when we don't have enough time during what we've seen from numerous Charles Dickens adaptations of A Christmas Carol, where we have a little bit more of an emotional element, and we spend time with Tiny Tim, or we spend time with Bob Cratchit, and we really have a little bit more dialogue. Here, we don't get that. So I think the transition hurts a little bit.
And if you think about any of those Bill Murray performances, I know Groundhog Day hadn't come out yet. I don't think What About Bob had come out yet either. But like you said, it's not that he's always the asshole, but there's always that cynicism to his characters where they never come off 100% changed of heart. The personality doesn't change. The actions may change. They'll do nice things for people, but there's still that strong note of cynicism all the way across the board. So that's why I don't think that this analysis makes any sense, especially with a Scrooge type character. Like, he's still going to be that personality. He just might be doing nicer things now, but he's still going to be a cynical asshole. That's just how that character works. And Murray does play that very well. It's hard for me to think of, like, until later on in his career, like Lost in Translation and stuff like that, where we actually did start to see the more reflective and also like self-aware and self-conscious, less ego of the characters that Murray plays. The Wes Anderson movies especially, where almost he's like the downtrodden character. He's not the cynical know-it-all anymore. So during this era, it's really challenging of me to think of any characters that he had played up until this point that would give Roger the inkling that that kind of character transition would actually be in a movie like this. Because I can't think of any characters that would represent that.
So when he actually gets it right, and you brought it up with End in Translation and the Wes Anderson film, these are singular characters that use dialogue as depth.
Yeah.
Here, he doesn't have to change a lot in those movies. So now, especially with Groundhog's Day, the situational boosts his frustration, and that's where he does well in moments like that with his comedy. But but when you're like a light switch going from hard a-hole to nice guy, that's where he does show a little bit of his flaws, and we've seen that from a few of his movies where he has to kind of pivot his performance. He's never been a great transitional actor. You have to give Bill Murray some time to really build that, to get into that character, or else you're just going to get an SNL skit that we've talked about. That's what this feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad that Gene did like this film, and I felt that he really brought some good points to the table. And I really think that Roger was overly critical of the movie. Again, he's often the one that we side with, but I can understand why he didn't like this movie. But I do think that he maybe, and we know him to be the researcher. He does a lot more research when he's doing his reviews and essays on film than Gene does. So I think he had some inside information about the production, about the chemistry between Richard Donner and Bill Murray, and that is what he's really focusing on. I'm not saying it's a know-it-all moment. I'm just saying that, like, he definitely put more into that part of the story than how he actually felt about the movie itself. He doesn't speak a lot about the special effects. He doesn't speak a lot about the side characters. He doesn't speak a lot about the direction. The entire criticism is mostly based on Bill Murray's performance and his lack of joy. And I find that challenging for me.
I find it shocking because here is Roger Ebert, who's a huge literature man who really does do his research, but he's also a reader as well. But I'm going to double down on it. I think he knew about the production issues before he saw the movie. So he is actively looking for these problematic things that just stay in your head. This is why I avoid any research before movies. So I don't look for that, or it doesn't stand out. It's like being told what the ending of the movie is because you're actively looking for things that are building up to that climax and you're anticipating it. So this is where I think he is really showing the disappointment in the things that he read was correct, because that's the only thing that you're really paying attention to with the story, supporting all the defects that your eyes are glued to at that point.
Okay, so let's grade these guys then. So, Gene bringing the movie to the table, he had a lot more favorable things to say about it, and I appreciate the fact that he did give a call out to Karen Allen and some of the side characters. And I like when Gene enjoys a movie. It's a rarity where we get him to be excited about something when Roger's not. So with that, and with the fact that he gave us the whys, he liked it, but also wasn't afraid to say the challenges he experienced with it, I think it's a solid B for me.
I think that's fair. Roger, this one I was a little setback and quite a bit disappointed with, because he goes into it with something that I can agree with. I mean, it starts off really great, but then we go into the ridiculous arguments of it, and even to his written review, it just doesn't make sense. It's not a Roger Ebert review that I've read or been accustomed to, because this is one, if I saw the movie, didn't read it as a review, I'm like, this is going to be at least a 2.5 star to 3 star, just because of the uniqueness of the context to it. And it's an adaptation that tries something different. And he gave this movie 1 star in his written review. And if you're going to have that just interpretation of just a singular character and ignore everything else around it, that's where I see a flaw in the review. So I'm going to go a 0.5 star above his review of this movie, and I'm going to give him 1.5 stars.
It's totally fair. And it made me think about it too while we're having this conversation, is that we really hadn't seen a lot of unique, daring, and experimental adaptations of Christmas movies up to this point. Like, seriously, up until like the late 80s, early 90s, Christmas films were really played to a certain standard, right? They were really close to the source material. I mean, look at every adaptation of Christmas Carol or Scrooge up until this one, and they're all practically facsimiles of each other. Granted, Albert Finney's is kind of a musical, but it still is very by the numbers adaptations of these movies. And then we start seeing people actually taking the experimental factor and putting them into modern times, getting dark and gothic and almost mixing horror with the Christmas element. Batman Returns mixing a superhero and gothic elements to like a Christmas time theme. So yeah, we weren't at that point yet. And now I feel like you can't have a Christmas movie come out every year that isn't a horror film or a supernatural thriller that's set around Christmas time. And we're seeing less and less traditional adaptations. So maybe we're just spoiled from like the last 30 years having like these real fun and off the beaten path Christmas movies. And for Roger, he's like, why are they tampering with the formula that's already been set? Why are they tampering with the Christmas movie formula that we've been watching since cinema started? So maybe he's got a little bit of that bias too.
Well, it could be that bias or a Charles Dickens bias, because we saw the same thing with adaptations of Great Expectations. Is it must be something with Charles Dickens literature where they're so taboo, so good that no filmmaker wants to tamper with it or put their unique spin. They can have almost motivations to some other ideas, but for adaptations, there's really nothing that takes these movies other than what we saw in, say, Scrooged. And then you add, again, the Christmas element to it, and that makes it even more unique. So it's like trying to redo Shakespeare that we've seen numerous times. It is the literature piece that filmmakers in Hollywood either don't want to take the time to or money to interpret, or they don't want to take the chance because they really don't know how to translate that into society today or societal situations. So it's a relatability piece to how the audience is going to interpret it. So, and to me, with Roger, I would have thought that he would have appreciated that. And this one's probably the biggest one that I got wrong going into his review.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like him at all. And that's the only way that I can rationalize it, is that he is being a stickler for the respect of the source material, because we hadn't entered that era yet of people being experimental and taking things to modern times. Okay, yeah, no, so this was a good conversation, and it was really enlightening to see the tables turn with these two, because normally we both kind of side with Roger more than Gene. And in this one, I totally sided with Gene. I understand Roger's critique, but I think there was just a little too much out of the pocket influence of why he thought the film was the way it was and the reasons that he gave. Okay, so next week, since we are still in our holiday movie theme, I'm bringing one of my personal favorite Christmas action flicks to the pod. I'm bringing The Long Kiss Goodnight, directed by Rennie Harlin, written by Shane Black, starring Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson and Brian Cox. It's just a really, really fast-paced, high-octane Christmas action film. But does it hold up in our modern times? And what did Roger and Gene think about it? So that's our next week episode.
Leave it to you to bring an action Christmas movie, I swear.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm one of those guys that, hey, it's not Christmas until Hans Gruber falls off of the Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard, right? Die Hard's a Christmas movie. Long Kiss Goodnight is a Christmas movie, in my opinion, too. And I will die on that hill. But we'll save that conversation for that episode. Okay, so everyone, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, review, rate, subscribe, 5 stars. to Back to the Balcony, as well as my show, the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. You can find me at thecultworthy.com, and you can find my friend Justin over at
themoviewire.com.
And hey, we're almost to the end of the year. We've got 2 more episodes to finish up 2024 with. We'll have another holiday episode and then our New Year special, and then we're right into season 2. We want your suggestions. We want people to reach out to us, give us comments and reviews. It's been a little vocal on YouTube again, which is fun. So hopefully our viewers there are going to give us some more suggestions, but they've been liking our picks. And it's a consensus now that no one likes Little Monsters except for you and me.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair. I can see it.
Anyways, everyone, thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.